frame rater.
The 3DO is a concept created in 1993 by Electronic Arts founder Trip Hawkins. It wasn't just a system for playing video games. The term used to define the 3DO's title of being a multiplayer wasn't referring to the ability to enjoy games with multiple players. In fact, I would wager that was a rather low priority. This multiplayer term was representative of its ability to play audio, video, and photo CDs, the latter of which loading this quickly. Revolutionary. Video CDs were generally lower on the resolution, so you'd get a picture like you see on the screen now. The abilities of the 3DO were not all available out of the box. You needed a digital video module to play MPEG-1 video CDs on your 3DO, for instance. Including said peripherals in the hardware would only increase the production cost, hence increasing the retail cost. Selling for $700 in 1993, which is $1,300 adjusted for inflation, it'd take a wealthy household to consider. The 3DO company, as it would be named, didn't have the largest budget of their own. Therefore, they leaned on other companies to handle the manufacturing. The first company to take on the hardware was Panasonic with their 3DO FZ-1 model. That's the one I've got with me here. There were multiple other manufacturers that followed, such as Goldstar, Sanyo, even AT&T was gonna before they dropped out. Alternatively, you could skip the system and buy a 3DO blaster card for your PC, enabling play of the 3DO library on your PC. 3DOs even made it to various hotel buildings with a unit called the Panasonic Robo 3DO. It could carry up to 5 discs at once with its multi-loader mechanism. This is a beautiful piece of technology. A second Panasonic iteration of the system was released the following year, called the FZ-10. This featured a push-to-open CD drive, opposed to the FZ-1's motorized disc tray, which has been known to malfunction. The 3DO would end up being one of the gaming industry's failures, although holding a fairly respectable slot in that category with its 2 million units sold. Possibly due to being in real 3D, says the real 3DO. In the 90s, that usually meant 3-dimensional graphics, not the visual effect you get with red and cyan glasses. 3-dimensional graphics were a big deal back then. Pretty much everyone in the gaming industry wanted a piece of this new market. They all thought 3D graphics would be the future of video gaming, and it was. Ironically though, the real 3DO didn't truly provide the real 3D graphics it promised. Homebrew developer Game Blah Blah in 2017 noted how the 3DO doesn't process genuine 3D. It uses distorted cells to give an illusion of 3D without actually providing it. The consumer market didn't know it back then, so continue to put away your toys. So says this infamous 3DO commercial. But why put away your glorious Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis when the only game to play is Crash and Burn? Yes, for the first month and a half of the 3DO's life, this pack-in title was the only game you could play. This was due to the finalized hardware being unavailable early enough for developers to do their full testing prior to the retail release of the system. Let's take a look at the launch FZ-1 model by Panasonic. On the front you have 2 buttons, one to power the system and another to open or close the disc tray. Powering on the system initiates this red light. When the system is loading, a green light will show on the opposite side. Below the CD tray is your single controller port. We'll go over the 3DO's controllers momentarily. Be sure to only use 6-pin controllers that were designed for the 3DO. The way it handles this input is very different from other consoles like the Sega Genesis or Atari 2600. Using those controllers in a 3DO won't do anything, other than potentially damage your system. On the right hand side you have a video expansion port. On the back, composite and RF out options for display, as well as S-Video, an unexpected but greatly appreciated upgrade from composite. To the left of the RF out is the memory expansion port. The 3DO has 32 kilobytes of internal storage memory, which isn't much, but the library of games isn't known to create save files that were very big. Nonetheless, with enough games you would inevitably still run out of space. So what you could do is purchase a 256 kilobyte expansion card, which would be plugged in here. Unfortunately, these were never made available outside of Japan. So what would you do if you ran out of space? Pray the games that you own have a way of deleting the saves within the software, because the 3DO itself has no memory management in its BIOS. Otherwise, your only option would be to purchase additional software like the Game Guru in order to delete existing save files. An oversight for sure. By the time Panasonic came out with the FZ-10 model, they had learned from their mistake and included the ability to delete saves. Now, about those controllers. There are a ton of different variations, however the most common ones are right here. The best way that I can describe the original controller is if you made a hybrid between a Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo controller. This is the controller that came with a Panasonic 3DO, and this is the controller that came with a Goldstar 3DO. They share the same functions, however one is notably more comfortable than the other. While the Gold Star controller looks nice, the D-pad it has is just too big, making it impractical for games. It's great for controlling interfaces, for example using the 3DO to play CDs. It even has imprinted icons on the D-pad to demonstrate the various functions. Perhaps the 3DO controller's greatest perk is the headphone jack located on the bottom next to a volume knob. This allows multiple people to listen to the system with headphones inserted. How many practical uses are there for this? Well, I guess not many, but it's an intriguing feature no less. Thankfully, the first-party controller's wire is absurdly long. You can connect up to 8 3DO controllers at once for one of the 3DO's games, which is known as FIFA International Soccer. Imagine a couch co-op experience with 8 people. Someone's gotta try that out because I'd love to see it. With there being just one controller port on the 3DO, how does one connect to multiple controllers? That would be by daisy-chaining them together. Every controller has its own 9-pin controller port located next to the wire. This is, in my opinion, a great idea, since it means less wires between yourselves and the TV. The caveat is now you have a bunch of wires sitting among you, which is not the comfiest experience. Still, as a concept, I think this was a brilliant idea. Now made obsolete, however, by consoles that use wireless controllers. Back in the 90s, if you were going to the store looking for 3DO games, you probably wouldn't be searching for long because they stuck out like a sore thumb. This is a 3DO game box. Might be wondering why it's as big as 2 stacked Game Boy Advance game boxes. This large packaging was an effort made by 3DO to prevent theft. The jewel cases that CDs typically come in could be easily hidden under your clothing, so what better way to circumvent this than to make their theft as uncomfortable as possible? I don't have the one 3DO box I owned anymore. All I have now are jewel cases, which were often found inside those boxes. Most people probably threw the boxes away after taking out these jewel cases, because to actually put them on a shelf with your other games is inconvenient to say the least. These are the 4 titles I physically own for the 3DO, along with the sampler CD which I didn't know anything about prior to starting it up. This CD was meant to sample the various functions of the 3DO, giving you demonstrations of its hardware, software, and games.
Welcome to the real 3DO system. In all likelihood, you've never experienced anything like it. Let's take a look.
One section is dedicated to giving you a slideshow of upcoming games, with no information beyond the genre. They were right, I really haven't experienced anything like this. Too easy. One of the games called Road Race is perhaps the most 90s thing I've ever played. What the hell am I playing? In my opinion, the best thing on this disc is the color echo visualization. This looks cool, but the greatest thing about it is how you can actually control it. The buttons and D-pad will determine what shows and which direction it goes in. I feel like the fun factor here is something you need to experience yourself to understand. That being said, this is still just a novelty, so you're not missing out on too much. Figured the first real game to look at would be Crash and Burn, since it was all you'd have the first month and a half after its launch. It was developed by Crystal Dynamics, who would develop a good handful of games for the 3DO during its lifetime. Crash and Burn was the system's first impression for many 3DO owners, so is it any good? I've heard people say positive things about this game before, and I suppose it does deserve credit for playing like the futuristic Wipeout racing series 2 years before that came out. Alas, I find it hard to recommend. The environments are fairly basic with too frequent of a reliance on water and dirt roads, which really mess with the vehicle's handling. The combat feels more like an afterthought in execution, which is a shame because it could have saved this game, at least somewhat. Even more disappointing is the game's performance, which is absolutely beyond the capabilities of the existing consoles of the time, but does suffer from some major hiccups on occasion. I don't think this game gives a good first impression of the 3DO, which is why I will now shift my attention to a game that does give a good impression. Starfighter demonstrates what it meant to be a part of the real 3D experience. A considerably smooth frame rate, huge environment, and exciting gameplay make this one of the 3DO's most eye-catching attractions. In Starfighter, your pilot must complete various objectives in this remarkable free-roaming landscape. Objectives usually focus on attacking the enemy forces, or obstructions below. This may be the best choice of games in my 3DO library to demonstrate the 90s full-motion video fad, something of which the 3DO was no stranger to. Full-motion videos, or FMVs for short, are exactly as that title suggests, videos played in full motion. But in other words, greater resolution videos than seen on last gen, running at a more realistic frame rate. It was impressive for the time, and a lot of developers would shove as much of these into their games as possible. It was the hip thing back then. You'll often find quirky, exaggerated videos that'll either introduce the player to something new, give you a laugh, or attempt to be visually stunning. which may have worked at some point in the 90s. Starfighter's FMVs fit into that latter category with 3D rendered scenes which unfortunately haven't aged very well. The first one that shows is a whole 6 minutes long and consists mostly of different camera angles inside and outside the spaceship you'll be deployed from. With an open mind to the technology, you'll find that the FMVs, and perhaps the controls, are the only things about Starfighter that haven't aged well. Total Eclipse begins with a very Star Trek-inspired FMV introduction.
I am Lord Slodak.
Followed by this is what I can only describe as a 3D interpretation of a shoot-'em-up. You'll make your way through a linear flight path, shooting enemies as often as possible, because your health bar steadily depletes as you soar. Not sure for what purpose, but I do like the idea as it makes the experience more frantic. There are moments where the game relies on you to perfectly navigate tight spaces, which isn't very easy with the momentum of your ship. Total Eclipse can be quite difficult, but is both exciting and rewarding to play. Putt-Putt Goes to the Moon is one of the many children's games that was brought to the system. Being a childhood favorite of mine, this point-and-click adventure game leaves little to the imagination, with an incredible amount of interactivity to the environment. Point your mouse to pretty much anything, and you'll be greeted with a playful animation. That exhausts my collection of games. Now we turn to a couple games that I burned on CDRs 2 years ago. Physically, the discs appear fine, but this time I had even more issues getting them to work. A lot of them wouldn't even get past the title screens anymore. I did manage to get 4 of them working, and these are those games. Gex. This 90s platforming mascot made his debut on the 3DO. It was yet another game created by Crystal Dynamics. This would end up being the 3DO's most popular game, selling 1 million units. For a system that only sold 2 million units, that's an incredible achievement. Imagine if your game was owned by half the people who bought a system. Gex is known for being an icon of the 90s. His jump into relevancy was as fast as his departure, as his sarcastic, movie-obsessed style became cliched and uninteresting.
Let's get back to the mystery van.
Nonetheless, he did manage to get 3 games to his name, only the first of which being on the 3DO. This 2D platformer is entertaining, though admittedly repetitive. The first half hour takes place in a cemetery, which is already a bizarre place for this game to start. From what I've seen, a majority of the game takes place in glum environments like this, which isn't the vibe I look for in these types of games. Gex is by no means bad, but I never found myself playing it for too long. Bust a Move is one of 2 multiplayer games I tried out. It's a classic puzzler where you have to match the correct colored bubbles with their groups above. Be the first to remove all the bubbles before your opponent. This version of the game only has 1 board for multiplayer, which is a letdown. Nonetheless, for what is there, it plays great on 3DO. Ballz DX Director's Cut was the other multiplayer game I played. I only got this CDR to read once, and just for 1 match. Even then, the music wasn't loading properly. Can't say much about what I played other than the fact that you're all made of balls, and your objective is to hit the other player in their balls. Which balls? Whose balls? Doesn't matter. Balls. Wolfenstein 3D is the last of the CDRs I burned that somehow worked correctly. In fact, there were no problems whatsoever in playing this one, so if you have a 3DO and a cheap way to burn discs, Wolfenstein 3D might be one of few that works well regardless of what burning technique you use. I had played through most of this game long ago on the Super Nintendo, and having gone from there to the 3DO, it is a complete breath of fresh air. This granddaddy of first-person shooters makes a great home on the platform with silky smooth frame rates, and controls that actually mirror a modern configuration. It also features some alternate sprites, like those used for the weapons, last seen on the Macintosh and Super Nintendo. Regarding the game, on the off chance you haven't heard of it, Wolfenstein 3D plays like a maze where the player must navigate many labyrinths in order to collect keys while eliminating the enemy threats. It's simple by today's standards, but has a sort of charm that would later be perfected in id Software's Doom. Speaking of which, we might as well squeeze a segment about the 3DO's infamous port of this iconic game. I feel like more people know about this programming disaster than people who know about the 3DO system. As a synopsis, the development was put into the hands of Rebecca Hindman, who was under the direction of someone who thought porting a game just meant copying the files over. Once it became obvious that this was not the case, a relentless struggle to get the game working, with minimal time left to ship, turned it into the abomination we know and hate today. But hey, at least it had a unique soundtrack, much like Wolfenstein 3D's port before it. I can't finish this list of games without giving an honorable mention to Road Rash. Unfortunately, it's not a part of my collection, and I don't have too much experience with it personally. The 3DO port is known as the best way to play this classic, chaotic racer. I've seen a few people dub the 3DO as their Road Rash machine over the years. It is to many the reason to own this system. Another honorable mention goes to Road & Track Presents The Need for Speed. Indeed, the famous racing series first got its feet wet on the 3DO in 1994. The irony is how this game, despite its title, is known for not being all too fast. Its eventual port to other consoles, called the Need for Speed Special Edition, was given a speed boost, making the 3DO release of the game the inferior choice of the bunch. There are many other classic 3DO games worth taking a look at, but I've exhausted what I'm able to show off today, so let's wrap things up. In my opinion, the 3DO is a lot like an earlier PlayStation. The sorts of games you'd find on this platform were varied, and regardless of who you were, there would probably be something here for you to enjoy. Anyone who owns the 3DO can experience a good selection of games, should they build up their collection. While the system may have been a commercial failure, I think it has held up well enough to be considered an endeavor worthy of respect. That said, respect is the most you may want to give a 3DO because the reasons to own it beyond its charms are quite slim. The multimedia aspect has been vastly outdated by even the cheapest of tech today, and most noteworthy titles were eventually made available on other consoles. Judging by the resale prices of today, you'd be doing your wallet a favor by sticking with a PlayStation. Somehow, the 3DO legacy was meant to continue. A planned sequel to the system, the 3DO M2, was well into development. Finished prototypes were shown off in trade shows in the 90s, manufactured once again by Panasonic and Gold Star. However, in 1997, the M2 was officially cancelled. A good call considering all the competition they would have to face. And that's about it. If you'd like to know a bit more about the 3DO, such as the homebrew and a couple more games I tried, you can check out the video I made 2 years ago. By the standards I place on my channel today, it's by no means a professional video, but it does serve as an existing, albeit rocky presentation of some other things the 3DO can offer today. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you frame raiders in the next video.